talking about CSS media queries. Now, I did a little small discussion of media queries. Actually, media queries, it wasn't really discussed. It sort of came into play when we talked about responsive design, and that's mainly because that's where most people what most people think of when they think of media queries is responsive design, and truthfully, it is where it's used the most. But media queries do have other things, and I'm going to delve a little bit into, because of one of the other features I was going to talk about, it caused me to delve into things that do exist currently. So we're going to talk about that as well. So basically, we can go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and I'll clear out the chat so you guys can see. And then I got to make sure I have it up so I can see any comments that you have. There we go. All right, now we got that. So I'll go ahead and I'll do the screen share. We'll start with the example. It will look somewhat similar to the example that we had from last time, from the responsive design one. Here we are. That's the right one. And so, we'll start with the HTML. The HTML is really, really simple. Have the container class, which you'll see what it does here in a little bit. And for the button, have the responsive button. I did this so you can kind of see it. And I talked about this last time as well. I talked about how in mobile, many times you want things to be bigger than they are on other platforms. Unfortunately, I did not do what I probably should have done, and I did not modify the base font size, because the base font size is because I am using rims here, but I just changed the rims instead of actually changing the font size. But really basic. Let's get over the styles. This is where the meat of most of what we're talking about is this right here. I did this here to talk about another part that I'm going to talk about here. There's like I said, there was another part I was going to talk about, and that other part was the CSS when else rules. Like I said, I'll mention them at the end once we're done with the show and tell part. But part of the when else rules also showcased something called supports. Supports is a really, really interesting CSS feature. It basically allows you to query the browser to determine if it supports a particular piece of CSS. Now, in our case here, this is kind of nonsensical to see if a browser supports display flex. I seriously doubt there's a single browser out there that doesn't support display flex. But the idea is there, especially if you're writing code towards a browser or towards a feature within CSS that is really, really new, that maybe only, for example, Chrome and Firefox support, but yet you have to have support for, IE isn't really a thing anymore. Now it's called Edge, which now even the new version of Edge is Chromium. So I would almost bet that Edge kind of comes along for the ride there with some of the new features, but I'm not entirely sure how much of Chromium gets brought in, and I'm not sure how that whole thing works since they're taken from the Chromium project. Anyways, but surely there are going to be some browsers that are going to fall behind. There are going to be some users I know in previous jobs, and even in our current job, we do have government clients, and government clients do take longer to catch up to date. So they more than likely have older browsers and things of that nature. So this is a really, really interesting feature here of CSS that allows you to determine if a browser supports a particular CSS setting. And this is not, you don't have to only do one, you can do multiples. You'll see it down here with media query. You can do the same here with supports. Supports can be ands, they can be ors, they can be nots. You can have, if it doesn't support a particular thing. So basically you can write it if it supports something. You can write it if it doesn't. I'm going to actually, I'm going to switch sharing, because here, I'm going to go over here real quick and showcase the supports. It's Mozilla that I'm using. So we're going to just switch. Actually, what I'll do, I've been having this issue. I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare, because it seems that if I try to switch sharing, it doesn't always work right. So stop and reshare seems to always work, at least. So here we are. All right. So supports is really quite interesting. Like I said, you know, it just supports. You can ask if you support display flex, if you can support any kind of support condition. You can do, like I said, you can do ands. Here's another version of, you know, the syntax. You can be very specific about what you're seeing if it supports. So it's not just, you know, a simple setting. You can be complex settings. Does it support this? Selector support, font support. This thing has just an enormous number of things that you can test about the browser. Really, really, really great. Like I said, knots are in there, so you can say if it doesn't support this, um, you can have, you know, and knots if display grid and not display inline grid. So you can do it like that, to where you can basically check if something is supported and something's not supported. If only one thing is not supported, you've got all kinds of different ways that you can easily string things together. You can have and or strung together. It's stuff like this is coming along the lines, especially once when else comes in. Once when else comes in, I'm going to have to start. I might have to pull back on saying that CSS isn't a language anymore, because um, I'll show it in the example. The example will show you what I'm talking about. So let's not go there yet. But this is getting to where we can get into some pretty complex logic. We can do ands, and ors. You know, ors here, you can string together ors. You can have and ors knots. You can have them all strung together in all kinds of different ways. Um, you know, does it support specific things? I mean, prefixed versions. You can check for support of just about anything. So it's really, really a nice feature. I'm going to go ahead and move over here, because we'll come back to this here in just a minute. Because I will showcase now what I'm talking about here. So we'll stop and reshare back to our code. Okay, so that's what supports does. Like I said, I put it in here just to showcase it. If for some reason we were in a really old browser that didn't support Flexbox, the container would be display block, and what would happen is when I adjust this, you wouldn't see it adjust. So we're using a very small screen as our default screen for mobile, just because I don't have a very big screen to begin with. So so I want to keep it as simple as possible. So much like a mobile screen, like I said, there's a lot of padding here. I mentioned this the last time, that when you're in mobile environments, you want that button as big as it can be, because you're no longer using your mouse like this. You're using your finger. So you're taking your finger and you're trying to touch the screen. So for example, here, let's get to the desktop version. If you've got that little itty bitty button there, that little itty bitty button is a lot harder to hit, and sometimes it doesn't quite push, you know, especially if you have big fat fingers, like sometimes some of us do. So it's a lot better to have the buttons much bigger. So this is supposed to be mobile. Here we're going to showcase what I'm doing here. So for fun, I went ahead and put flex direction column, because basically if we're in mobile, what I've done is I've basically just made flex. It's using flex across the board. So container flex. And if I'm in mobile, I just set flex container to column. So basically it puts it into a column, to where they go like they should in mobile. As we get to here, here's what I'm calling. Once again, I kept it very small, because like I said, since I have a small screen, there's no reason to put large breakpoints. We're just trying to showcase something here. So this is my tablet setting here, basically. So when I break into tablet, we go into the two column mode, but the button still stays relatively big, because once again, we're still on a touch screen. It's a bigger touch screen, mind you, in a tablet, but it's still a touch screen. Oh, here is something else that's kind of interesting. I forgot to mention this. With media queries. Media queries, most people probably think, and I'm gonna go back over to the media query page here in just a minute and go through all of these things. But most people probably think, and that media queries are specifically for page sizes and things of that nature. And yes, that is what most of them use. For most of the CSS frameworks, use media queries based around page sizes. However, media queries are not limited to page sizes. Here is a media query. Here's another media query here for the orientation. So since this is supposed to be my mobile one, I said where the width is less than 500 pixels and the orientation is portrait. Now, luckily, since I'm in a desktop, I'm guessing it defaults to portrait mode. You would think maybe it would default to landscape, but it doesn't. So you can put different of orientation portrait. It doesn't. Well, it might make a difference, because if you think about it, if you're on your mobile and you've got your normal up and down mobile like this, if you turn it to the side and go landscape mode, you might want to change some of your settings. So this may not actually be a bad thing to have orientation portrait, and it might not be a bad idea to have other items that are orientation landscape. And so when you flip it to landscape, you change the settings, you change the way it looks and things like that. So and there are a number of other media queries that you can test too. So it's not just the width of the screen that you're testing. You can test test for things like orientation and things like that. Now, it doesn't have all of the ones that supports checks for just about any kind of CSS you can do. Any CSS you can throw at it, it will check to see if that browser supports that CSS setting. Media queries are testing more higher level generic stuff. One of them is being orientation. So you'll see what some of them are, and some of them have been deprecated. So there's less of them now. But I wanted to make sure to bring that up. I did say I was just doing a little bit more of a dive into media queries. So I wanted to showcase that it's not just about screen width, but it's also about checking other items as well. And so as you can see, we're in landscape mode, and then we go a little bit further, and boom, now we're in desktop mode. Now we've got the much smaller buttons. Here's our landscape mode. We just decreased the font size, the overall container font size to 1.25, and we just decreased the padding size, and even decreased the responsive button padding, so the button inside the padding, to 1 rem. Before it was 1.5 rems. I wanted to make it a big enough change that you could actually see it. And then as we're into the desktop mode, you see that the padding is just half a rem, which was about, if I'm right, 8 pixels. That's about 8 pixels of padding. So yeah, that's kind of how that whole thing works. Like I said, though, media queries don't stop at the width, but this is a really nice one that is a new way of doing media queries. This is one that's worth noting. This is the between media query. So before, you would have to say max width, or no, min width is this and max width is this. And like I said, it was so confusing. It was so very confusing as to exactly how you had to get it done the right way. So this makes a lot more sense. So basically, we're saying if 500 pixels is less than or equal to the width. So basically, if we're at 500 pixels and we're under or at 650 pixels, so that's a between media query right there. So if we're at or equal to this point, or at or equal to this point, between these 2 points, then we go ahead and we have certain CSS settings that can be applied, certain CSS properties that can be applied. So this allows us to easily do desktop, tablet. No, sorry, desktop, tablet, mobile. There we go. I did it in the wrong direction. And so yeah, this allows for very easy creation of different pieces. I was going to try to go into this a little bit more in depth. Maybe try to do things like put some of the small, medium, large things you've seen in some of the CSS frameworks. But yeah, doing that was going to take quite a bit of time, and this was late last night, so I didn't think that was going to work out too well. Do you ever need to use this to detect the canvas, or is that feature mostly up to date on modern browsers? I would say on modern browsers, Canvas is more than likely available. It just all depends. It probably isn't a bad idea to do it for testing of other browsers anyways, because like I said, there's a lot of people out there that are here's Bob's question in case anyone wants to see it here. And so yeah, I would say basically you could probably guess that the Canvas is supported, but yeah, I wouldn't see that it would be a bad thing to actually test for. let's see what media query supports. So let's go back to there. Actually, here I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing real quick, and then we'll go back to the media query that I talked about. I would go back to here. Make sure this is okay. Good. All right. So yeah, there's a number of different things that you can check. You can say media screen, by the way, is there's a couple different types of media queries you can check. I believe if I'm right, it's the default is all, but there's three media types: all, print, and screen. I believe the default is all. I think that's the default. So if you don't write any kind, so if you just say app media and then don't write anything, the assumption is all. But you can do media queries specifically for printing, like if you're going to be in a print preview mode or something like that, and you want your screen to look a certain way when it's being printed, you can actually put CSS styles based around print versus based around screen. In my case, I'm not planning on it being printed, so I didn't really care too much, and I didn't really see the purpose of making it for screen, once again, because it wasn't really going to do too much. Now there were, as it says down here, a number of other additional media types, even TV, projection, handheld, braille, but basically they've been deprecated. I think now it's media query version 5 that's out. In case I was looking around in here last night and found that. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these are the media features, much like what I was just showing with orientation. Orientation was one of them. You'll find it down. Hang on here. Here. There we are. Orientation. Hover is another one you can check for. I really don't see why hover would be checked for. I seriously doubt there's many browsers nowadays that don't support the hover of an item inside of CSS. But you never know. I mean, if you're on some really old browsers, perhaps maybe it does. I've never done that. I've never found something where hover doesn't exist. But these are a lot of the features you can check for. If you go through them, some of them will tell you the ones that are no longer used. With color, that was an interesting one actually. With color, let's just show this real quick. With color, you can check the bit level in it as well, like the min color, the number of bits available in a color. So it's not just that you can check if color exists, basically if you have color that you can use, but also what type of color you can use, how advanced your color is, and things of that nature. I believe if I'm right, 8 bits would be it supports transparency. It supports a level of transparency, because what you'll see right here, this is a standard web color basically, and I believe if I'm right, I think it's at the end. I could be wrong. It might be at the front, but I think it's at the end. There are 2 more potential bits that can be put onto there that then determine the level of transparency. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. I know RGB does it, because if you do it with the CSS RGB function, you have RGB and RGBA, and the A stands for an alpha channel. Alpha channel being the transparency channel. So that's how that goes, and I believe that is what an 8-bit color is. Once again, don't quote me on that. I didn't go looking that up. I'm pretty sure that's right. But yeah, I found color to be pretty interesting. I found a lot of these things, but as you see here, we get into some of these. These were deprecated in the media queries level 4, which is why I believe we're into media queries level 5 right now, because a number of these have listed that they were deprecated in media query level 4. So do go through and read some of these, and watch for the ones that are deprecated and all those kinds of things. This one's an interesting one to me. Full screen display mode, full screen, or picture in picture. Now that's kind of a really cool thing if you think about it, especially if you're doing something that is going to be displayed that could potentially be displayed picture in picture. That's kind of neat if you ask me. To be able to detect picture in picture mode and change the look of your display, that's an interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, a number of these are and a number of these are things that you wouldn't think. I don't think this has to do with grid, as in what we talked about last time, grid versus Flexbox. Grid, yeah. I don't think that's the type of grid it's talking about here. I think it's talking about the way the screen is laid out. Height is obvious, height of the viewport. So we've already shown width, so height is also available as well if you wanted to be able to detect certain, change certain styles based upon the height of the screen. Let's see. We showed orientation already in ours there. I mean, there's just a good number of items here. But like I said, some of these you've got to look to make sure that they're not deprecated. Just make sure that they are actually still used. If they're deprecated, don't use them. But most of these you're not going to use. I've never used color. The only one I've ever used is width. That's it. That's the only one in any of the in all my time of doing media queries. I've never done anything outside of width. So it was kind of interesting to see all the different things that could actually be checked for. Once again, we still have logical operators inside of media queries and or not, things of that nature. Actually, only applies to style only if an entire media query matches. Huh. Interesting. Okay. So yeah. Basically, when using only, older browsers would interpret the query screen and max width 500 as screen, ignoring the remainder of the query and applying its styles on all screens. Huh. Very interesting. So basically requires that the entire media query match for it to do it. Yeah, okay. We're kind of outside of that. But like I said, the one thing I was planning to show was going to be how the next part was going to go. I'm going to go ahead and launch this. Let me get this article up. I want to showcase this because this is what I was hoping. This is a big part of what I was hoping to showcase, and it wasn't until after I had already made the post talking that I was saying that I was going to discuss this that I realized that this was not available. So I think it might be done in scripting instead of CSS. Which part are we talking about? For Canvas, yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, you probably just check to see if the canvas is available. Actually, it wouldn't be that hard to do. That's right, because you could just detect if there was a canvas. I'm sure there's some kind of oh, what's the word for that? There is a word for navigator, the navigator object. So yes, the navigator object probably has it in there what it does and doesn't support and things of that nature. That's probably where you would detect the canvas. Um, here quickly here. There's what I was responding to, and that was in response to the previous question there about canvas. The next thing that I did say I was going to talk about was the when else rules. And then the when else rules are really, really cool. And I really do wish that they had implemented them by now, because I think then we could almost call CSS an official programming language at that point. Here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. I've gone ahead and I've brought up the article. This is an article. I found a couple other really good ones out there. So there's a lot of articles, especially recent ones, which made me believe that it had potentially been implemented, but it has not. So we'll go ahead and pop over to here. So the CSS when else rules. Now this article doesn't really showcase the full extent of what when else can do. We'll go past there. Yeah. Continue reading. That's not talking about when else. That's talking about the current way things are done. And here's the way for using when else. So when else allows you to do things differently. Okay, maybe it is good to go back to here. So what they're showcasing here is this is the way you currently do it. And when a media query, when you end up in a particular style, here they have actually they don't have a flex direction, but basically you're adding things on, or you would potentially have to override certain items here. In this case, it is overriding. So here we go. Margin right normally is 1 rem, but down here when you're in the responsive design area, margin right gets set to 0. So basically the right margin goes away. But it's an override. When you're doing the when else, though, it's a little bit different. It's no longer an override because it works like an if then else, from what I thought this was an if else, but it actually works like an if then else, because what they're not showing, and even if you go through this whole article, they don't mention it. What they're not showing is that in the CSS spec, the else can also have a condition. So the when has its condition as one would expect. In this case, you would do the media query and it supports display flex, and there you go. Boom, you put your parts in there, and then else you do this. Now, the difference between the one above and this one here is that When you're not in the responsive design, when you're not inside of the smaller screen, you're not overriding anything. Nav item doesn't have margin right and margin bottom. It ends up only having margin right one rem. And in that case, so in the regular full size screen, you wouldn't see a margin bottom 0 or 0.5 rem. That wouldn't be there at all, because since you fell into the else condition, it would only have this, which didn't even put the margin bottom in there. That's the difference between the two of them. So basically, this is, you either apply this block or you apply this block. It's not a this overrides these settings here and this like that. No. This is if, and like I said, if then else. The else condition, the else can have conditionals, much like you see up here in the actual spec. I think it's in this article or another article I was in, had a link to the spec, and so I went through the spec. Let me see if it's this article. If it is, then I can recommend you read the article, and you might be able to find the spec. He talks about can I use, which can I use shows that we can't. Oh boy, hang on. We got someone making delivery here, so hope. Oh boy, there he is. But yes, I'm trying to see if it has that link to the spec in here. It would be worth reading for those that are really interested in this. Dynamic styling, responsive design, browser dev tools. No, maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was one of the other articles I read. There was one that had a link to the CSS spec, which was really good, and in there it showcased that this isn't just when else. This is when. Well, let's talk in the term of if. Will you stop it? Hey, bad dog. Yeah, having a pit bull's great, isn't it? But yes, this is so if else, basically. So you could have a conditional here as well in this. It really makes it something interesting. I think it makes it a really good addition. I'm really hoping it comes very soon. I would love to see stuff like this, because this would really add a kind of a next level of supportability of features and things like that. You could get a lot more advanced in your checks on what kind of system you're in. As you can see, it looks like they're going to allow supports to be done like this. So the and doesn't need to be on supports if you do supports. So supports would still be supported inside the win check there. Hang on a minute, another minute. He's over there being a nuisance. Anyways, yes, where we were. So I would really like to see this come into the CSS spec. I think that'd be a really great thing to have. I'm hoping. Well, okay, I'm misstating there. It's in the CSS spec. I'd like to see it in the browsers. It's been in the spec for, I'm willing to bet, since at least 2021. Like I said earlier, I don't think many people saw this. Like I said earlier, I found something from Google about adding this as a Chrome feature, and they were talking about potentially implementing when else, and this was in 2021. So I'm willing to bet it's been in the spec for that long at least. Knowing Chrome and Firefox, I would expect by now one of them would have it. Of course, they have to do a loud delivery. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I can barely hear myself think. Hang on, I'm going to close this. I won't be able to keep it that way for long. It does get quite warm in here. That's why I leave that thing open. But yeah, I'd like to see this come into the spec. We're gonna have to just wait for it. But there is one link down here that you can check from time to time, and this is the one I'm talking about. Can I use? If you are wondering if something's available in a particular browser that you're working in, This is a really great site. It's kept relatively well up to date. But I went into here, like I said, I Googled when else, and it did say it was supported in Chrome 129.